The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
You can't tell all the Democrats trying to take down President Trump without a scorecard. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. As the partial government shutdown carries into a fifth week, Nancy Pelosi wins the battle to bar Trump from giving his State of the Union address on schedule. Some Democrats continue to savage the president, while others, most prominently Senator Kamala Harris, announced their plans to run against him. We'll be joined by Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com to review the bidding. Meanwhile, the meltdown of Venezuela reaches new heights or a new low, with a young opposition leader to Marxist President Nicolas Maduro declaring himself the new interim head of state and President Trump formally recognizing his legitimacy. We'll discuss the sad and dangerous state of affairs in Venezuela with Juan Hidalgo, Latin American specialist at Cato Institute. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board with an incredible story of a new proposal to add tolls on an interstate highway in Virginia and fines for those who get off the interstate. Yes, you heard that right.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. On and on we go with the longest government shutdown or partial shutdown in American history, now entering a fifth week, and the media was all excited this week about President Trump agreeing to postpone his State of the Union address after Nancy Pelosi threatened to refuse to allow him in the House chamber for what she calls security concerns. But Democrats continue to play the violin for federal workers who've now missed two paychecks, even though we know they'll get paid as soon as the shutdown ends, if not before. Listen to Tim Kaine, Virginia senator and running mate of Hillary Clinton in 2016, discussing what he saw outside a restaurant in D.C. offering deals to furloughed federal workers.
It's a cold day in Washington, and it looks like a breadline out of the Depression. People standing out, waiting in the cold to get their soup or sandwich.
Yes, he actually said that, saying the partial government shutdown is creating a depression-like environment in D.C. Meanwhile, Democrats continue to try and get President Trump to give in on his border wall funding demand, while they keep savaging him with statements like this from Congressman Hakeem Jeffries.
We have a hater in the White House, the birther-in-chief, the Grand Wizard of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. One of the things that we've learned is that while Jim Crow may be dead, he's still got some nieces and nephews that are alive and well.
And you wonder why Trump is hardly inclined to give in, as Democrats continue to compare him to the lowest form of human existence. And then there's the irrepressible Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who added yet another unbelievable statement to her building legacy, saying President Trump's refusal to act on climate change will bring about The end of the world as we know it.
Millennials and people and, Gen Z and all these folks that come after us are looking up, and we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it?
And then there was former Secretary of State John Kerry, who's been out attacking Trump around the world for months on end, and now says Trump's failure to take drastic measures to save the planet should lead him to do the right thing.
I wish there was a lawsuit capacity that could hold people liable for such an insane decision as he has made, which is going to cost lives. People will die because of the president's decision.
If you had President Trump sitting right opposite you, what would your message to him be?
I can't play that. I would have a conversation.
What would you say to him to get it through? What would your message be?
Resign.
I can't, just resign. Well, a truckload of Democrats, 8 to be precise, with many more waiting in the wings, are now officially running for president in 2020, seeking to reverse the Trump policies on climate change and pretty much everything else, including Kamala Harris, who made a formal announcement of her candidacy this week. And in her announcement, the California freshman senator used virtually every inarguable aspiration of the American people.
Truth, justice, decency, equality, freedom, democracy. These aren't just words. They're the values we as Americans cherish, and they're all on the line now. The future of our country depends on you and millions of others lifting our voices to fight for our American values. That's why I'm running for President of the United States.
Well, it is pretty hard to argue against truth, justice, decency, equality, freedom, democracy, but hard to see where that distinguishes her from every other Democrat. Now, another one who announced this week is Pete Buttigieg, mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and the first candidate for president who's not only openly gay, but married to another man.
It's a fact of life, and it's also something that has informed my experience and my approach. I mean, for one thing, the most important thing in my life, my marriage to Chasten, is something that exists by the grace of a single vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. When it first crossed my mind that I might run for office someday, I believed that coming out would be a career death sentence. So the world is changing.
Indeed it is, and the Democrats certainly reflect that change. They have 3 women, including 1 woman of color, a Hispanic, and an openly gay person already in the field, and it's still early. We couldn't let this segment conclude without the latest media jaw-dropper, apparently feeling their charges of collusion with Russia and obstruction of justice and campaign finance violations and all the rest against Trump was not enough. This week, Ari Melbert, chief legal correspondent at MSNBC, uncovered yet another impeachment-worthy issue.
A potential Trump scandal hiding in plain sight. The government has been shut down for 31 days, but there's mounting evidence that President Trump's workday has been shut down far longer. Stretches of time when he avoids doing most of the work of the presidency. We're seeing a new low in presidential work ethic in contrast to recent presidents who kept far busier schedules.
Now, you might think the left would be happy that Trump's apparently a lazy chief executive because when he's not working, he's not busy ruining the country. Quick break, and then we're back to survey the growing field of Democrats chomping at the bit to take down Trump in the 2020 presidential election.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel and get our Truth is Making a Comeback. America's Top Stories. With LN Editor-in-Chief Lisa K. Donner. An alternative to the leftist programs on TV. 5 facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Without the liberal bias. LN Radio, syndicated from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Listen to all the big names in politics with your host, Tim Donner. LN TV, the right analysis with our Liberty Nation authors from across the globe. The Uprising Podcast, fun and entertaining commentary on what's really going on in the swamp. All this and more when you subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel today.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And then there were 8. The number of announced Democratic candidates for president in 2020, that is. This week marked the formal declaration by an expected top-tier candidate, Senator Kamala Harris of California, whose name is now added to a field that already includes Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kirsten Gillibrand, former HUD Secretary Julian Castro, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, and 3 others, including the first openly gay presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg, mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Here to help us evaluate this large field, which will undoubtedly continue to grow a lot, is Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Tim. Great to be here.
Great to have you. Looking forward to our discussion. And let's start with Kamala Harris, who essentially announced her candidacy when she interrupted Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley 3 times in his opening sentence introducing the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. She seems to have it all going on. A woman of color, child of immigrants, unstained by white privilege or toxic masculinity, fairly young, but not too young. Would she be considered the front runner at this point to win the fight to try and unseat President Trump?
Yes, I think so. I think Kamala Harris is definitely a front runner. She checks all the right intersectionality boxes, and that's important because the far left can't risk perpetuating white supremacy by electing a white man. So she's black and she's a woman. That gives her 2 intersectionality points right there. She's become very popular on the Democratic side. Now, some have criticized her for reaching out to Wall Street and some of her past decisions as a prosecutor. I don't think that those things are likely to slow her down. So she's definitely one to keep an eye on.
Now, does that mean that a Joe Biden or even a upstart progressive like Beto O'Rourke, who narrowly lost the Senate race in Texas to Ted Cruz, does that mean that they're pretty much out before they're in because of the fact that they're both white and male?
Bobby O'Rourke, he might be a contender. Joe Biden, he's polling high right now, and so is Beto, but it's still early. So I think Joe Biden is going to be a little bit too old by the time it gets to when the campaign gets into full swing. You never know, but the intersectional wing of the progressive Democratic Party is very strong and very loud. So I could see those numbers start to go down, and people like Kamala Harris and Julian Castro start to rise up.
All right, let's talk Pocahontas, Senator Elizabeth Warren. She seems to have the ability to organize and raise money, but is her disastrous DNA test and her posturing as someone she's obviously not enough to sink her?
You know, I honestly have no idea why Warren is even bothering at this point. On the intersectionality scale, she has 1 point because she's a woman, but she's tried to steal another intersectionality point by pretending to be Native American.
Cultural appropriation.
Oh, exactly. So after she released that DNA report that shows that she's about as Indian as Ocasio-Cortez is economically literate, she completely sucked her chances. And honestly, you mentioned it, cultural appropriation. I do not think that they will forgive her for that.
All right, well, let's move on to another woman who checks one of the boxes because she's a woman, but she's also white. And that's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who was virtually handed her Senate seat by Hillary Clinton. But then after Hillary lost to Trump, Gillibrand threw the Clintons to the wolves by saying Bill Clinton should have resigned in the 1990s. And she now seems suddenly woke. What does she bring to the table?
I'm sorry, I forgot who Kirsten Gillibrand is because nobody really cares about what she has to say. I mean, really, she's basically just the second coming of Hillary Clinton. And if the Democrats are smart, they're going to sprint in the other direction when she starts campaigning. So yeah, you're right. She did throw Clinton to the wolves, but that's only because she forms her political stances by putting her finger up in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. Mm-hmm. She has flipped so many times. She makes John Kerry look like the epitome of consistency.
So you're saying that Senator Gillibrand is like Hillary Clinton without the charm?
I don't know if that's possible. I don't think that the word charm and Clinton should be used in the same sentence.
Okay, well, that's just your opinion. I'm not sure that most of the voters agree with you. I'm sure her personality had nothing to do with the fact that Trump wiped the floor with her in 2016, but that's another discussion. So, Jeff, do you think this Democratic primary will descend into a race to simply see who's furthest left and who hates Trump the most?
Well, hating Trump is a prerequisite, so I don't think any of them hate Trump more than any of the others. But it'll be interesting to see if the extent to which somebody veers to the left is going to have a contribution to who gets the nomination. I mean, Bobby O'Rourke and Joe Biden are polling high right now, and they're not as far to the left as Michael and Elizabeth Warren. But at the end of the day, Democratic voters hate Trump enough to vote for anybody who's running against them. So it may not be an advantage, but it may not be a disadvantage either if somebody is too far to the left.
Well, it won't be a disadvantage within the Democratic primary, and that's the point, that can anybody get the nomination that doesn't satisfy the far-left progressive base, while at the same time understanding that a far-left position is unlikely to get them over the top against Donald Trump. But, by the way, I noticed what you did with Beto O'Rourke, they're calling him Bobby. Why is it that so many conservatives refuse to call Beto O'Rourke Beto?
Because his name ain't Beto. He's not Hispanic. The guy's as Irish as a pint of Guinness. The fact that he's another one who tried to steal an intersectionality point, but I think they've kind of forgiven him. Elizabeth Warren can't get away with that, but for some reason, Bobby can, so I give him credit.
All right. I caught what you did there. So who among the Democratic field, including those already in the race and those expected to join, like Cory Booker, which of them do you think gives the Democrats the best shot to take down Trump?
You know, I would love to see them nominate Cory Booker. It's not going to happen. I think Kamala Harris has probably the best chance. But you never know. Somebody like Julian Castro could follow Obama's path of being somebody who's relatively unknown, but who gets catapulted to the national stage. It seems like he might have that charisma, but I think so far, if I had to bet on somebody, it'd be Kamala Harris so far.
Okay, fair enough. You're going to go with the odds, which have her in the lead at this point among most prognosticators. But the fun is just beginning, Jeff. We've got about, 22 months to go before the election, and the entertainment value we're going to get from the Democratic primary is almost incalculable, isn't it?
Oh, most definitely. What I'm looking forward to the most is seeing Trump's Twitter feed when the Democratic debates start. That's going to be incredible.
Indeed. Indeed it is. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thanks, Tim.
That is Jeff Charles of LibertyNation.com. We'll break away for a moment and then come back to discuss the rapidly deteriorating state of Venezuela and the audacious decision by President Trump to recognize a new unelected Venezuelan president.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, what has happened to the country of Venezuela in recent days, or really weeks, months, and years, is almost beyond comprehension. One of the world's most oil-rich nations under the iron-fisted Marxist leadership of first Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro has descended to a point where masses of people are starving, violence is rampant, inflation has skyrocketed, the most basic of supplies and medicine are unavailable, and Venezuelans are fleeing the country in droves. And now, 35-year-old Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has declared himself interim head of state with the support of the Venezuelan legislature, the National Assembly, but not the military, which remains loyal, at least publicly, to the dictator Maduro. And now, in what could be the turning point in this ongoing political and humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, President Trump has recognized Guaido as the legitimate Venezuelan head of state. Here to help us understand all this and what effect it might have on the United States is Juan Carlos Hidalgo, policy analyst on all things Latin America at Cato Institute. Mr. Hidalgo, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. What would you say the chances are that Maduro is able to hold on to his power versus the chances that Guaido can successfully consolidate his newfound power?
Well, in the last 6 years, nobody has won a bet predicting the downfall of Nicolás Maduro. He has outlived many predictions, previous predictions, where people said that this time it was it. However, we see a confluence of factors right now that make this week's events different from previous ones. We see a united front from the opposition. The opposition in Venezuela is not a monolithic group. It has different leaderships that fight among themselves with different agendas. Some of them have been more blunt in their resistance to Maduro. Others were more willing to compromise and negotiate with the regime. Right now, under the leadership of Juan Guaido, we see that the opposition, which was hopeless up until like a month ago, is back in the ring, is unified. It has rekindle its link with the population. The population stopped believing in the opposition also up until recently. And now that relationship between the people and the opposition is back on track. So I think that that's one of the factors that gives us hope that Venezuela might change in the near future. The other one is the international community. We see a strong backing, not only from the United States. Of course, the United States is the big player in the ring, but we also see Canada. We also see most of Latin American countries, including Venezuela's neighbors, Brazil and Colombia. We see the European Union. We see Japan. All of them recognizing the National Assembly of Venezuela, which is controlled by the opposition, as the only legitimate body, not recognizing Maduro as legitimate, and most of these countries are recognizing Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. I think this might break the impasse that we have witnessed in recent years. Of course, the ultimate arbiters in this situation are the army. The armed forces are so far firmly behind Nicolás Maduro. The question is whether they're going to crack.
Now, Maduro claims that he was legitimately elected, but many countries, including the U.S., refused to recognize Maduro's election in May of last year as legitimate. Just how corrupt was that election?
Well, elections in Venezuela had been deeply flawed since Hugo Chavez was in power. The electoral roll, it has many problems. I mean, Venezuela, according to the official electoral roll, is the country that has more people over 100 years, for example, than anywhere in the world. Many people who have died are still voting in Venezuela. So the elections have been deeply flawed. However, the election last year was beyond pale. The main opposition parties were prevented from contesting the election, basically only having some token, allowing some token opposition to be in the ballots, and the opposition thus boycotted the election. So the international community didn't recognize that election as valid. And back in a few days ago, in January 10, when Nicolás Maduro was sworn in for his second term, that was what triggered this chain of events. The United States, Canada, most of the Western countries said that they wouldn't recognize Maduro as legitimate president because of that sham election, and that the opposition-controlled National Assembly was going to be the only legitimate political body of the Venezuelan government.
Venezuela is one of the countries from which the U.S. imports the most oil. Some of the others are Canada, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Nigeria. How important is the crude oil and petroleum we import from the petro-state of Venezuela?
Not anymore. I was looking at the numbers the other day, and it's less than 3% of daily oil consumption in the United States. Let's remember that the shale revolution has made the U.S. a major producer of oil. Canada is the biggest foreign supplier of crude to the United States. And oil production in Venezuela has collapsed, given the mismanagement and corruption that besieges that regime. Right now, North Dakota is producing more oil than Venezuela.
Now, let me put it to you. Let me put a question to you straight. Is Venezuela, do you think, headed for an inevitable civil war?
Well, the problem is that just one side of the equation is armed. In order to have a civil war, you need both sides armed. And in this case, the population is disarmed, and the one with the guns is the army that is backing the government. So if we had a civil war in Venezuela, we would have had it already. I mean, Venezuela has been in this state of chaos and unrest for over 6 years. But the big question is, of course, what's going to happen with the army. Let's remember that the army, this is a narco-dictatorship. And the army is deeply involved in crimes. We're talking about massive corruption. And when we're talking about corruption, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that have disappeared from the coffers of the Venezuelan state. So we're talking about massive corruption, smuggling, drug trafficking. Several heads of the army have been named by the Treasury Department as drug kingpins. So the incentives of these guys, of course, are to stick with Maduro because they know that the alternative is facing justice.
Mr. Hidalgo, many thanks for joining us. You've enlightened me and our listeners, I'm sure. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's Juan Carlos Hidalgo of Cato Institute. Stay right there, because we'll be back with a truly jaw-dropping story out of Virginia that represents a startling threat to your right to freely move about the country.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, we have a couple of signature segments here on Liberty Nation Radio. One of them you've already heard today, Say What, and the other is Talkin' Liberty, where we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza, to discuss threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty. Hello, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
Individual
liberty. It's a great thing. Not collective identity.
Not collective identity.
Right. Individual liberty.
Identity politics. Well, if you like it, you might as well switch the channel or click off
or stay and
right
be converted.
now. To stay and be better yet.
Yes.
I'm going to preach the gospel of the free markets, brother.
Yeah.
So, this first story, Scott, is so incredible that I had to read it like 3 times.
Yes.
I was sure, no, it can't be saying what I think it says. It is such a violation of individual liberty, and it has been advanced by a Republican in the state Senate of Virginia. You go through the details.
Well, first, let's just say this. All of our 50 state legislatures are in session, Tim, and no person's life, liberty, or property are safe as a result of that. So I bring this to the table as emblematic of so many of the problematic bills we see throughout the country that wish to steal liberty from the citizens in so many ways. Rest assured, for instance, there are so many crazy gun bills in the Virginia legislature alone, I couldn't keep track of them. So just assume, if you're out there, that if you live in the state in the United States, the legislature is actively trying to destroy your liberty right now. In this instance, it is shocking that the state, some actors in the state want to toll one of the largest highways in the state, Route 81. It goes from the northern tip to the southern tip,
Interstate 81, and it goes
the western edge of the state,
and goes all the way north from Virginia up to Canada and down to Georgia, I believe. So
much of the interstate highway traffic that occurs in Virginia occurs on this road. So the legislators want to tax it because they think it's going to make $150 million in revenue for the state, but they don't want to give that pain to Virginia residents. So they want to try to give excess pain to others. And one of the schemes that they've done for this is to establish tolls along the road. But how are they going to stop people from dodging the tolls, Tim? Here's how they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. They're going to set up and allow private companies to take pictures of cars that are leaving the roadway and then getting back on the roadway some distance down the line, past the tolls.
As if they're breaking the law.
Right. And then they're going to send them, this law authorizes them to send them like a ticket, like they've done, like you say, like they've broken the law. And here's something that hasn't even been considered. You and I are recording in the Liberty Nation radio studios as we speak, which is right near a toll road that is very easy sometimes to get on and off of and sometimes not, depending on traffic and whatever. I oftentimes decide when I'm traveling, this happens to me at least once or twice a month, Tim, where I think, is it worth the $3 to save the 5 minutes to get on the road or not? So you can't make that decision now. It's like an illegal decision to make, is that...
But the double dip of it is unbelievable, that they would first impose a toll on a section of interstate that's always been free. Okay, we've seen that happen before. But to then go beyond that and say, and if you try to get around this new toll that we're taking money out of your pocket, then we're going to fine you for having the audacity to drive on a road of your choice. And like you say, so you avoid a $3 toll. Well, look, you may spend that much extra in gas getting around it. You may lose time. I mean, so it's not as if it's an equal transaction. It is in some ways an imposition that a driver imposes upon himself by getting off and having to go on a side road. I mean,
we are not allowed to make that imposition. Some of the other legislators in the body added other language that means to discriminate against out-of-state drivers. So what they try to do, and this has been done by so many legislatures through the years, it's explicitly forbidden in the Constitution for state laws to treat people who live in this instance, Virginia, differently than people who live in any other state.
Full faith and credit.
That's why you
called, right?
Well, freedom to travel, full faith and credit. There's interstate commerce implications. There are many constitutional provisions that would bar this kind of treatment. But it's almost like they would like to say, well, if you're a semi-tractor trailer from out of the state, then you have to pay the toll. But if you have Virginia plates, so they've come up with a number of different types of schemes in the legislation to try to benefit or reduce the payment by Virginia drivers. They're all going to be challenged. We've already seen one interstate trucking concern say they're going to challenge the bill, but it's out there. They're trying to come up with ways to get themselves more money to spend, and your liberty be damned, Tim.
Exactly, because they can't control their spending to begin with. So now they're going to put it on us. And you know what, Scott? If this came from a Democrat, I would half expect it, because they've looked at every scheme to put their hand into your pocket and pull more of your money out. But the fact that it's a Republican means if this is what a Republican will sponsor, God forbid we find out that the Democrats are going to tax the air that you use in your vehicle when you're driving on the side road.
You know, one of the other things you have to remember, too, is the camera doesn't just live there and only concern itself with the toll issue. It's also going to learn how to send notices to people who are a week late on their license plate sticker registration and the other 6 stickers that you have to have on your car. So it just becomes another tool to soak the citizenry for money one way or another.
Because they can't control their own spending. Okay, let's move on, because if we continue on, we'll cover nothing else.
Have to march to Richmond, right, with our pitchforks and.
Now, body camera programs, we've talked about it before as something that protects both police and alleged perpetrators or the general
honest
public.
Police, good police,
honest police. But by using it in all transactions, it will protect, in some cases, the police, and in some cases, the accused of false accusations. But police departments are starting to dump them amid high costs. Is that legitimate, or are they doing this? Is that a pretext for getting rid of something that makes them a little bit uncomfortable?
So this came from a Post piece, Tim, that documented a number of departments around the country that say they're dumping them because of the cost. And I can't read into the hearts and souls of the chiefs and such that are saying it is too much money. But one thing we know for sure is there is no better way to demand accountability from how police officers treat the citizenry than there are with the use of body cameras. It preserves the interaction for citizen and police officer alike. And I can tell you that one thing is sure. If you were the dirtiest cop in the world, what's the one thing that you would fear the most?
A body cam.
That's exactly right. And so I'm not arguing that these are low-cost items, but just at what price accountability? We see...
Well, it's not just accountability. It's also public confidence in law enforcement. If you've got body cams and people know, well, this cop may lie, the alleged perpetrator may lie, but the camera will settle the debate. And that provides the kind of confidence in law enforcement that is draining away.
I think it would be appropriate, Tim, for a number of state legislatures, to perhaps require body camera collection of evidence, because we see all the time police abuses. There was a case that came out of, I think it was St. Louis this week, where a undercover police officer was involved in a protest, not in a protesting capacity, right? He was monitoring the behavior of protesters, and police officers there treated him. He said they abused him like they abused Rodney King. And so police abuse is real. It happens every day in America, and the best protection against it for these people who have extraordinary power is a very simple tool, this body camera.
Well, and also it protects the police against false charges of police brutality. So it works for everybody. There's no reason not to have it other than budget, which is what being, like you said, we can't prove. We can't look into their minds, but we could look into their budgets and see it. Right. In other words, see
they've got those defined benefit pensions they have to pay for, Tim, and those aren't cheap. So
San Francisco wants to tax vacant shop fronts in order to attract new business. How do you send a tax bill to nobody?
I read this article a couple weeks ago about the problem of vacant properties in New York City as well, and I thought it was hilarious. So here you have two cities that make it exceedingly hard to attract tenants, both with respect to the vast number of all kinds. I mean, how long do you think it would take to get zoning approval to change a property in San Francisco from one use to another, a restaurant to some other thing? It's exceedingly hard in these places that demand many layers of bureaucratic overview. Then you have the high wages that their laws require. Right? What's the minimum wage in San Francisco? $100,000 a year now, or something like that. And then, so you have these people who can't attract tenants. I'm sure that the owners of the properties would prefer to have rental income, right? But they can't attract the tenants that they need to. So their properties are vacant. And the city says, well, we're not getting the revenue that we would get from the taxes on the sales of whatever would occupy that place. So, well, who has money here that we can stick who has a pocket we can stick our hand into? It's the owner of the, unfortunately, vacant storefront who now has to pay.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds fair to me, Scott.
Yes, and to be clear, this is a proposal. This is not yet a law.
But because it's in San Francisco, you kind of assume that there's actually a chance that it will pass.
Yes.
All right. Well, Scott, thanks. And next week, more threats and hopefully promising developments.
I'll try hard to dig up for a promising development.
Yeah, work extra hard. We need to keep the audience feeling up rather than down. This program, Liberty Nation Radio Plus, LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, with me and Scott and Lisa K. Donner, are available to you on demand anytime, any place at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.